They vanished in places you're supposed to be safe. National parks. They're America's sanctuaries, vast landscapes of breathtaking beauty where we go to feel safe, to connect with nature, and to escape the chaos of the modern world. They're preserved, protected, and patrolled. We walk their marked trails, camp in their designated grounds, and put our trust in the safety of these natural cathedrals. But for some, these tranquil forests and majestic mountains became the last place they were ever seen. Despite being on marked trails, near populated areas, and in places literally designed for protection, they vanished. Their stories are a chilling reminder that even in our most cherished wilderness, the line between sanctuary and peril can be terrifyingly thin. These are the most unsettling cases of people who disappeared in places where you're supposed to be safe. The wild has always held a certain mystery, a power that both draws us in and commands our respect. We accept a level of risk when we step off the pavement. But the stories we're about to explore go beyond the expected dangers. They involve children who disappear in the blink of an eye, experienced rangers who vanish from their posts, and visitors who are consumed by a darkness that has nothing to do with the wilderness itself. These are cases that defy easy explanation, leaving a void of unanswered questions that haunt investigators and families for decades. They force us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes, the most terrifying mysteries don't happen in dark city alleys, but in the wide-open, sunlit spaces we believe are our havens. Section 1. The Boy Who Hid and Never Was Found. The Disappearance of Dennis Martin. On Father's Day weekend, June 14, 1969, the Martin family was doing what they loved most. William Martin, his father Clyde, and his two sons, 9-year-old Douglas and 6-year-old Dennis, had made the trip into the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. It was a family tradition, a pilgrimage into the lush hills of Tennessee. They hiked to a highland meadow known as Spence Field, a popular spot with stunning views. Dennis Martin was a small, energetic kid with dark brown hair and wide, curious eyes. He was wearing a bright red t-shirt, a color that should have been easy to spot against all the green. As the afternoon wore on, the adults settled in while the children, Dennis, his brother Douglas, and some other kids, decided to play a game. The plan was a classic childhood prank. Split up, hide in the bushes on opposite sides of the trail, and jump out to surprise the grown-ups. William Martin watched as the kids scurried into the foliage. He saw Dennis, the last one, disappear behind a bush. He waited. A few moments later, the other children leaped out, laughing. But Dennis wasn't there. At first, no one panicked. William called his son's name, expecting him to pop out with a grin. Silence. The playful mood vanished, replaced by a growing dread. William's calls grew more urgent as he ran up and down the trail, covering nearly 2 miles in his frantic initial search. But his son was gone. It was as if the forest had just swallowed him whole. As dusk fell, the full weight of the situation crashed down. The family had no way to call for help. Dennis's grandfather, Clyde, had to hike 9 miles to the nearest ranger station to sound the alarm. Help was on its way, but so was a disaster. That evening, a torrential thunderstorm descended on the mountains, dumping inches of rain in just a few hours. The deluge transformed the landscape, washing away any tracks or clues Dennis might have left behind. The window to find him was closing fast. What followed was the largest search operation in the history of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Over 1,400 people, rangers, law enforcement, civilian volunteers, and even Green Berets, were mobilized. They formed human chains, sweeping through dense undergrowth across 56 square miles of unforgiving terrain. Day after day, they found nothing. Not a scrap of his red shirt. Not a shoe. Not a single trace of the 6-year-old boy. Ironically, the sheer size of the search party might have hindered the effort, as inexperienced volunteers could have trampled potential evidence. A child-sized footprint from a bare foot and an Oxford shoe, like the ones Dennis was wearing, was found but initially dismissed. By the time it was reconsidered, the chaotic search had obliterated it. Then, a strange and deeply disturbing account emerged. A man named Harold Key and his family, hiking several miles away, reported hearing an enormous, sickening scream that afternoon. Shortly after, they saw a disheveled-looking man running through the woods, trying to conceal something he was carrying over his shoulder. At the time, Key's son thought it was a bear, but his father was certain it was a man. Investigators were troubled but ultimately discounted the report, believing it was impossible for someone to abduct Dennis and carry him that far, through such difficult terrain, so quickly. The official search was called off on June 29th. The leading theory among park officials is that Dennis simply wandered off and succumbed to exposure, especially after the storm. Another is an animal attack, though wildlife experts were skeptical, as an attack would have likely left behind blood or torn clothing. The third theory, the one William Martin held for the rest of his life, was that his son was abducted. Years later, in 1985, a ginseng hunter claimed to have found the skeletal remains of a child in a remote area, but couldn't relocate the spot when he finally led investigators back. Dennis Martin vanished 6 days before his 7th birthday. He has never been found. His disappearance is a profound wound in the park's history, a case that led to a complete overhaul of search and rescue protocols. It's a stark testament to how a moment of innocent fun can turn into a lifetime of grief. When a child vanishes, the tragedy feels immense because of their vulnerability. But what happens when the person who disappears isn't a visitor, but one of the park's guardians? More than a decade after Dennis Martin was lost to the Smokies, a case in the starkly different landscape of the Arizona desert would prove just as baffling. This time, it involved a man tasked with protecting the very land that seemed to swallow him whole. Section 2. The Vanished Ranger. The Disappearance of Paul Fugate. Chiricahua National Monument in southeastern Arizona is a sky island of towering rock spires, a remote and rugged landscape. On January 13, 1980, Park Ranger Paul Fugate was on duty at the visitor center. At 41, Fugate was a seasoned ranger who knew the land inside and out. Though sometimes described as a rebel who chafed at authority, he was dedicated to his work. That afternoon, around 2 p.m., Fugate told his colleague he was stepping out to check a nature trail near the recently acquired Faraway Ranch. He was in his full green and gray National Park Service uniform. He left his radio and keys behind, saying that if he wasn't back by 4:30 p.m., she should start closing up. It was a routine check, something he'd done countless times. He walked out the door and into the desert air. Paul Fugate was never seen again. When 4:30 p.m. passed with no sign of Fugate, the alarm was raised. An initial search found nothing. As days passed, a massive search combed the rocky canyons, but there was a complete lack of evidence. No footprints, no torn uniform, no sign of a fall. It was as if he'd simply dissolved into the landscape. Investigators immediately suspected foul play. A man with Fugate's experience wasn't likely to get lost on a short patrol. The absence of any sign of an accident made a natural cause seem improbable. His government truck was locked and undisturbed. This was his territory. For him to vanish so completely was deeply unsettling. The case quickly turned into a criminal investigation. One prominent theory was that Fugate had stumbled upon a drug smuggling operation, as the area was known as a trafficking corridor and was silenced. Another theory explored whether Fugate himself was involved in illicit activities, though no concrete evidence ever supported this. His personal life was also examined. He was married, but also in a long-term relationship with another woman. Still, both women were adamant he wouldn't have just walked away and believed he was a victim of foul play. The case grew cold, becoming a ghost story among rangers. Years turned into decades. The reward for information grew to $60,000. Then, in 2018, nearly 40 years after he vanished, the National Park Service announced that new, undisclosed information had prompted them to renew their public appeal for help. To this day, the case of Paul Fugate remains an open investigation. He is a ghost in the National Park Service, a symbol of the ultimate sacrifice without the closure of knowing how or why. If a uniformed ranger can be erased from his own post in the middle of the afternoon, what does that say about the safety of the visitors he was there to protect? The mysteries of Dennis Martin and Paul Fugate are defined by a chilling lack of evidence. But not all cases remain unknown. Sometimes, the mystery is solved, and the answer is far more terrifying than any theory. It confirms that the greatest danger in the wilderness isn't always the terrain, but the darkness in the human heart. Section 3. A cold case closed. The murders in Shenandoah National Park. In the spring of 1996, Shenandoah National Park in Virginia was bursting with life. Julianne Julie Williams, 24, and Laura Lawley Winans, 26, were experienced hikers who felt right at home there. In May, they set up their tent at a remote campsite along the Appalachian Trail. When they didn't return home as planned, their families called the Park Service. On June 1, 1996, rangers made a horrific discovery at their campsite. Both Julie and Lawley had been murdered. Their bodies were found bound and gagged, their throats slashed. The brutal crime in a place of peace sent a shockwave of fear through the outdoor community. The FBI was brought in. For years, the investigation was a painful and frustrating journey. Authorities briefly focused on a man named Daryl David Rice, but charges were dropped in 2004 when DNA evidence excluded him, sending investigators back to square one. For nearly 3 decades, the case remained cold, one of the most infamous unsolved crimes in National Park Service history. But forensic science was advancing. In 2021, a new FBI team had evidence from the crime scene retested using modern DNA techniques. In June of 2024, 28 years after the murders, they got a hit. The DNA was uploaded to the national database and matched a man named Walter Leo Jackson Sr., a convicted serial rapist from the Cleveland, Ohio area. Jackson had an extensive, violent criminal history and had died in an Ohio prison in March 2018. Investigators confirmed the match, stating the probability of the DNA belonging to anyone else was 1 in 2. 6 trillion. They learned that Jackson, a painter, was also an avid hiker who was known to frequent Shenandoah National Park. His timeline fit. Just weeks after the murders, he was back in Ohio committing other violent assaults. In June 2024, the FBI officially announced the cold case was solved. The monster in this story wasn't a myth of the forest, but a man. A predator who used the beauty and isolation of a national park as his hunting ground. The case is a tragic reminder that the sanctuary we seek in nature isn't immune to the dangers we try to escape. Sometimes the clues are physical, like the DNA that finally gave a killer a name. But other times, the only clues are psychological, hinting at a journey into the unknown that began long before the person ever set foot on a trail. In these cases, the mystery isn't just where they went, but why. Section 4. A Return to Mother Earth. The Disappearance of Drake Kramer. The Grand Canyon is arguably the most awe-inspiring landscape in North America. But for one young man, the canyon seemed to represent something else entirely. A spiritual destination for a journey that ended in complete mystery. In January 2015, 21-year-old Drake Kramer, a geology student from San Antonio, was at a turning point. His father described him as a hardworking and good student. But something shifted. Drake suddenly left home without telling his family, driving first to California and then to the Grand Canyon. The text messages he sent became increasingly strange. In his final text, he said he loved everybody and that he needed to be back with Mother Earth and set his soul free. On January 31st, 2015, Drake checked into the Bright Angel Lodge on the South Rim. He checked out the next day, February 1st. Alarmed by his texts, a family member reported him missing on February 2nd. Rangers quickly located his car, but there was no sign of Drake. An intensive search involving over 40 personnel, search dogs, and helicopters scoured the vast terrain. For 6 full days, they searched. They found absolutely nothing. Not a footprint, not a piece of clothing, not a single clue. Eventually, the Park Service had to scale back the operation to a limited but continuous search. Drake Kramer's case is baffling because of the psychological component. His final message hangs over the case. Was his desire to be back with Mother Earth a poetic way of saying he intended to take his own life? The Park Service believes he may have been suicidal, a sad reality in many national parks. Or was it a plan for a spiritual quest, a desire to live off the grid? There's also the simple, brutal possibility of an accident, a slip and fall in a remote area where his body may never be found. Unlike other cases, Drake left a clue, not a physical one, but a mental one. His words are a cryptic epitaph. Did he find the communion with nature he was seeking? Or did he fall victim to the canyon's indifferent power? He vanished into one of the most iconic landscapes on the planet, leaving behind only a car, a hotel receipt, and a string of words as deep and mysterious as the canyon itself. The stories of Dennis Martin, Paul Fugate, Julie Williams, Lolly Winans, and Drake Kramer are all profoundly different, yet they are bound by a common, unsettling thread. They all unfolded in our national parks, places we've set aside as protected and safe. These cases tear a hole in that perception, reminding us that the wild has its own power, and the dangers of the human world don't stop at the park gates. While these stories are terrifying, it's important to remember they are the rare exception. Annually, about 243 deaths occur on NPS lands, with the majority resulting from unintentional causes like drowning, vehicle crashes, or falls. And across the South National Park system, there are currently about 264 active missing persons cases. But the cases that stick with us are the ones that defy explanation. A child playing a game, a ranger on patrol, 2 women on a camping trip, a young man on a quest. Some cases are now tragically closed, confirming our worst fears. Others remain wide open, modern legends that fuel speculation. They remind us that safety is often an illusion, and that even in the most majestic places on Earth, a person can step off the path and vanish forever, leaving behind only a profound and haunting silence. The questions left by these stories are as vast as the parks themselves. What do you think is the most plausible explanation for these disappearances? Is it human intervention, the unforgiving power of nature, or something else entirely? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to explore more of the world's most compelling mysteries, be sure to like this video and subscribe. Thanks for watching.